Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Air Exchange. I am your host, Bruce Larange, and I'm pleased today to have the opportunity to have a conversation about air quality with our esteemed guest, Dr. Ayad Al-Attar, who has quite an interesting background and is recognized globally as an expert in air quality and all things related to the built environment. Just to give a little bit of background about Ayad, he is a mechanical engineer, an air filtration consultant, environmental enthusiast. He is the strategic director and instructor and advisory board member of the Waterloo Filtration Institute, an author of many articles on air quality, filter design, particle characterization, and climate change. And recently, I learned reading for a master's degree of science in sustainable urban development and air quality inclusion at the University of Oxford. So I'm sure there is much more to Dr. Al-Attar's extensive background that he'd like to share, and perhaps he can fill in the blanks. But the bottom line is we have access to a globally recognized expert today to talk about air quality. We're thrilled to have you here. Ayad, thank you for taking time from your busy schedule.
Thank you, Bruce, and it's an honor to be hosted here. I think air quality is an essential element of our well-being, and I believe facilitating that to 8 billion people, irrespective of their socioeconomic status, is certainly the order of the day. And I think we're facing many challenges. We have to realize the promises, chase the problems of air quality, and also alter our environmental behavior. So there's so many things to discuss. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I come from an air filtration background and an air quality background, and then I found myself asking myself the question, we're polluting so much and we have to filter so much. So before we get into the low-hanging fruit of air filtration, the question that I start asking myself, why do we pollute so much? And then hence my sustainable urban development endeavors started. Bruce?
Okay. Fantastic. Well, yeah, I think we easily could go well over the time that we have for this conversation. So I am excited to discuss as much as we can. I thought I would just jump in then, Ayad. I've had the opportunity to hear you speak on different forums and webinars, and one of the things that I appreciate is that you have a global viewpoint about indoor air quality. Many experts or people who are in this industry are regionally specific. But given your worldview and point of view globally around IAQ, I was wondering if you could share with our listeners any thoughts that you have how air quality and indoor air quality standards, or how it's looked at differently in different regions, and if there's anything that you think could be or should be adopted globally as relates to standards for indoor air quality.
Thank you, Bruce. I think this is a great question. There are probably 3 elements to your question. One has to do with the region. For example, if we address places or markets where they rely on, for example, split units as part of their air conditioning system. And if we dig deep and you uncover the split unit, you'll probably find a 5 mm thick filter. It's very difficult to have a conversation about air filter enhancement when filtration has not been really looked at or given the role to play, the space to make it happen. So that is an element, I would say, ailing enhancements of air quality. But also let's look at the areas where you have central heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. We have other issues to worry about. We have maintenance that not done by the book. We have inappropriate filter selection. We have leaks. We have systems that cannot really encompass more than low efficiency filters. The other aspect is the climate conditions. If you have high dust concentration, like the Arabian Peninsula, northern part of Africa, then you have high dust concentration, and the dust concentration may be well beyond that concentration set forth and specified by filtration standards. What does that mean? That means air filter performance deviation from that test report arriving with the filter that you buy from a filter manufacturer. And that's going to make us address a couple of things. One is you would need to look at certified air filter performance from a certified filter manufacturer to ensure what you're getting. And the third aspect is the operational part. You know, you get a good system, you don't operate it well, or you get a certified system installed by technicians that are not certified, and that highlights the importance of training and retraining and equipping the technicians with the tools, conditions, and what it takes in terms of instruments to ensure that they can finally develop the air quality outcome that the human occupant would require.
Right. Well, fantastic. And again, your experience here, I think, in looking at different regions is extensive. Is there anything you would suggest, Ayad, or that you've noted that you think should be more globally recognized versus regionally specific to increase indoor air quality in general?
I think we have two immediate issues to look at. The first thing, let's look at central HVAC systems. When you look at air filters, and I plan to discuss this extensively in the next 50 minutes, usually air filters are encompassed in the HVAC system, which in a way, it's a sweet and sour relationship, because air handling unit manufacturers, they want to sell their units. They've pretty much got their prices set up so they face a downward pressure, they cannot change it. Then if you try to have a kind of late conversation about enhancing indoor air quality, whether after you purchase or after you've done the installation, it's very difficult because you've set and you're limited by so many things. Now, if you try to do it, or according to some people, overdo it by going to as high as possible of an efficiency, getting the best indoor air quality and a second to none air filtration system, the complaint is the song that we've been singing in the past 30 to 40 years, and this is energy efficiency. Again, here, two things we need to look at is, in the past 30 years, filter media has advanced so well, you can attain, and maintain particle capture efficiency at a much lower pressure drop than in the past 30 years. That's one. And two, the fact that air filter design as a cartridge has become aerodynamic, so you can still achieve a much higher efficiency at a much lower pressure drop. So in a way, I think correlating high efficiency filters to high energy usage, I think with time is becoming a very weak argument, because now, as I said, innovations in air filter media and design has progressed to it. So I think what we need to look at is, in a way, reconfiguring the air quality quest and rewiring how we look at filtration, possibly separate the air filter segment from the air handling unit physically, but connect them in terms and performance. So integrate the performance, but have a physical separation. Of course, there'll be a connection. This way we can manipulate phase velocities, capture efficiency, maintenance, without having to go through the conversation we've been having and the arguments we've been having among facility directors, designers, heating, ventilation, air conditioning equipment, and filter manufacturers.
This is great, a really great point that you bring up. And I know, as someone who's in the industry and especially familiar with filter media, that the times have changed. We're still, in some cases, living based on information in the past and making decisions within HVAC systems and filter choices that are related to older information. There is a lot of exciting innovation that's happened. So I think it's really important that you point out maybe there's some myths versus realities, and the thinking of those who are paying for filtration for a building or responsible for it need to really understand the most recent innovations to get the best possible air quality for occupants in buildings. I wanted to switch gears a little bit, Ayad. A term I've heard you use, and again, related to your University of Oxford reading currently, is the term air quality inclusion. Can you define what that means and why that's important?
Thank you, Bruce, and I really appreciate the fact that you're shedding light in the very beginning on this. Frankly, I think humanity is sick and tired of putting air quality on the back burner, and all the technologies relevant to bringing or enhancing air quality, like basically taking the back seat in our priorities. So let's put things in perspective. When the topic of air quality is addressed, its inclusion lies in the policies, programs, and practices that can be developed among government organizations, municipalities, industry leaders, the private sector. Everybody can play a role to put together what would it take us to make it a pillar. And I would say a 0-0 coordinate action is installing a reliable, continuous air quality monitoring system. Just like, I can log in any app and, find the information I want as temperature, humidity, and Kigali, Buenos Aires, Tokyo, Kuwait, New York. I think air quality index should be an information that is forthcoming. Now,
Right.
once we have these policies, in place, we would then find out this is the kind of air quality I'm inhaling, whether I'm a 5 months old or 50 years old or 70 years old, and how's that going to impact my respiratory system. The next step would be correlate this to the outdoor air system, outdoor air quality, which EPA, again, a municipality, the government should be responsible, and having these data, monitored from Christmas to Christmas. If I wanted to see a trend, how does NOx emission, SOx emission, ammonia, H2S, PM1, 2.5, we have what it takes to get this information. This is not new. We have what it takes. So let's position what we possess in terms of capability. Having done that, then we can say, okay, now I've got what's outside. I know what is the air quality inside. Then therefore I can characterize the performance of air filters, whether it's doing well or not doing well, or I need to upgrade, or maybe it's an overshoot. But let's go back to the inclusion term, because I think this is where the premise of your question, lies at. When I use the term inclusion, I basically signify all these parameters that impact the air quality directly and indirectly. Whether appropriate air filtration, deployment and employment of air quality sensors, the filter media that you choose, how you manufacture a filter, what is the total air filter performance for the entire stage of filtration? Not looking specifically at a certain segment, but looking at the entire performance holistically, relevant to outdoor air as well as human occupancy, which has been looked at. Keep in mind,
Right.
Bruce talked so much about social distancing that seemed to have disappeared in thin air after the pandemic. But if this were to be implemented, human occupancy would have dropped to maybe below half. And maybe this is something that we would need to look at. Do we actually have appropriate human occupancy given the HVAC system, the air changes per hour, the air quality we have? Is the system sufficient to deliver air quality filtered by appropriate air filtration to 6 people, 10 people, 50 people? We've seen this
Right.
exercise only during the pandemic, when you're about to go to the mall and they say maximum capacity 10, and you were only able to get in when somebody else leaves. So this is what I would refer to as inclusion. I just want to mention 2 points. I think the initiative to have air quality included in policies from day one is really, really modest. And air quality is only called upon either by demand, or when we have a pandemic, or there's some sort of environmental disaster, wildfires. And the question remains, why would we need to wait for these unpleasant, disasters to be able to, call upon air quality?
Right. Fully agree, and well said. And I would follow up this point, Ayad, then with the question: do you think in the sustainable urban development, in buildings now, is enough being done to consider air quality inclusion from your perspective?
I don't think so, Bruce. I think, as I said, air quality has been on the back burner for a long time. It's been looked at as an accessory rather than a driving force. I think air quality has never really gained sufficient momentum to be a priority globally. It never gained the attention to be on the forefront of our priorities. But we've realized in the pandemic, it was the pillar of our economy because without it, we were locked at home, stripped from everything, benevolence, work, space, jobs, and changed the complexion of how we live and go about our daily activities. But it's not only being convinced of air quality inclusion, it's how we are going to include it will play a major role in its successful in the way we embed it. Look, I've been in cities without mentioning names. If you don't wear a mask during the pandemic, you either get fined or maybe you'll have a much higher consequence for not doing so. I've flown during the pandemic, and if you don't have your mask snug, flight attendants will yell at you. What
Right.
happened after the pandemic? Things
Right.
just, we kind of slid back to, the pre-pandemic compliance or complacent mode. So I think what we need to do is to bring this from day one, make it a law that, we cannot rely on appealing to the ethical compass of decision makers and municipalities and governments and facility directors says, please, if you don't do this, people will get sick. You have
Right.
if you need to have a built environment with a building envelope, you would have to show me a indoor air quality sensor infrastructure being installed. You need to share the data with the municipality and EPA, and if you go beyond the threshold, you don't have that permit renewed as certified to occupy. If you do, because this is also important, I invite banks to work with government organizations to give maybe interest-free loans. Maybe the government can give rebates or tax credits for those who would like to do it, but maybe don't have the time or the money to have a retrofitting budget.
Right. Yeah, really, really great points. I mean, two things I heard there. One is legislation, maybe more emphasis being put on not just encouraging, but maybe enforcing that the right standards are in place to focus on air quality in buildings for occupant safety. And then two is data. I mean, you mentioned the importance of being able to understand the environment, both outdoors and indoors, to be able to make good decisions. So I couldn't agree more. It's a little bit head scratching at times how, as we came through the pandemic, how quickly we've moved away from some of this thinking, which had begun to be forefront for people who were really feeling that impact of the danger of having air quality, which could be harmful or threatening. So I'd like to use that to jump into the next question, Ayad, which is, the importance of filtration technologies and filter performance for the built environment. Of course, you mentioned that we need data to make good decisions. But can you speak a bit about that and, maybe touch on why poor outdoor and indoor air quality is sometimes associated with or even blamed on filtration technologies and filter performance?
Thank you, Bruce. Again, another great question. First, let's admit to the correlation that exists between outdoor air and indoor air. And I think, in so many places, it seems that we have to establish that. This is very well established. It can vary, depends on the rate of infiltration, the rate of how much fresh air would you bring, outdoor air, sorry, rather than fresh air, which we also need to
Yes.
talk about this. So how much outdoor air you're bringing in. Now, here's the risk. You're bringing an outdoor air without knowing the physical and chemical characteristics of such air. Now,
Yes.
how is that adding to this health and safety of your systems and the health and safety of your human occupants? So, the second point is we pollute horrendously. transport and power generation together represent over 60% of our emissions. So, and then we spend all our money again to install a lot of air filter stages to be able to capture what we just polluted. So again, thinking preventively, why don't we just stop polluting? Or, if you want to combust fossil fuel, just do it responsibly.
Right.
So, and I also disagree with the fact just because we possess the air filtration technologies, therefore it just gives me somehow the right to pollute. That's not true. I would say that we need to be responsible on how we treat our shared environment. Again, continuing with our current environmental behavior cannot be sustainable. There are many studies that try to link COVID cases, the hike in COVID cases, and the coronavirus spread with air pollution, whether through PM1 or 2.5. But then again, existing filtration technologies, they're not, although they're hanging fruit, in terms of things to use and a potent tool, but also we should be able to re-examine our environmental behavior, because it seems to be driving our issues. And we've been suffering, Bruce, before the pandemic. Nobody can say otherwise. Although or despite the awareness, the increased awareness about climate change and air pollution, we're sustaining this consequences of the rising tide of air pollution. Again, we look at smartness in terms of cities, and let me address that because you asked me about the sustainable urban development. What do cities compete for? They compete for people, investments, and prosperity. And then when cities are polluted, they struggle to attract people and investments, and eventually they lose that allure of having a city that even livable, let alone sustainable, and let alone being smart. So I think what we need to bring about here is we need to alter our environmental behavior, and that's going to require everyone in every sector to do their fair share of contribution. Again, we talk about sustainability, and it seems to be, a label we put on everything that we do today. But I think if we're really serious about embarking on sustainability, we need to be able to help nations and encourage them to have the capacity to dream of a shared planet. Because if I'm wealthy and I, combust more fossil fuel while somebody cannot get 3 meals a day, I don't think this is a fair competition.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a very poignant point. And in some ways, I'm hearing, we can't let poor habits or societal activities be an excuse for filtration. Filtration needs to be something that helps enhance health in our lives, but there's still societal responsibility to try to eliminate as much pollution as we can. I think that leads me, Ayad, to another question, and you've sort of touched on it, but I'm interested to tease out a little bit more about if you can speak to why anthropogenic or human-based emissions are increasing, even though we know that there's an impact, of air pollution on climate change. Do you think that there's something that we need to do better as societally, or somehow to draw attention to this, so that we're not continuing to have a worsened situation when we actually know quite a bit about the problem at hand?
Sure. I think, one thing to look at is rapid urbanization. Now, recent studies show that we're going to be adding 3 billion people to the built environment or to the urban environment in the next 10 to 20 years. And,
Wow.
this is massive. Keep in mind that also population is growing, and we're now over 8 billion people. We can have a long conversation about this, but there are people that are with a much, I would say, intense footprint in various aspects, and then they have what it takes to acquire the best filtration technologies and filtration and HVAC systems. So they're burning so much, they're using so much, they're consuming so much, but they're also in a position to afford being in an indoor space and protecting themselves.
Yeah.
Now, this is in a way, has to shed light on, what do we do with or how do we share this benevolence with the developing countries. But this is a separate conversation. Let's go back to the point that you've mentioned. I think rapid urbanization, the way we're growing so fast, this is all going to require energy. Today, we are relying on fossil fuel combustion as the main element in the energy mix. We all love renewables in so many ways, but we have to, admit it. Renewables will always will never surpass what the fossil fuel, role can do. Everybody is promising by 2050 and 2040 we might have reached targets that we are being promised today. And then
Right.
again, I question that, I don't want to wait until 2040 and 2050. I want to see things happening in a much shorter period of time. Now,
Right.
let me also bring you to the most important point. We talk about air quality, we talk about being responsible from an environmental point of view, but the way we generate and use power, the way we communicate with our planet by not allowing it to regenerate itself, the way we even consume resources, the way we waste food and resources, and I think it's going to bring about a change one time to say, or maybe there's no supply chain of filter media. So what do you do? Or the temperature is so high up that we cannot have bees generate honey anymore. So I think we need to look at the consequences, long term and short term, of our environmental behavior. But let's go back to air quality since it's the focus of the discussion here. The message of air quality is clear, and I think it's been very clear after the pandemic. What's not clear, in my judgment, are the practices. We are insensitive to the location, geographic location. We're insensitive to the application. We think air filtration solutions are standard for any application, for any filtration issue. And we need to distinguish the issue to be able to have appropriate air filter selection. And that's going to require that we tweak the solutions, recognize what we are up against. The final point I want to make is that insensitivity or neglecting all these aspects will eventually lead you spending money on super duper filtration system that you still may not have the air quality outcome you're looking for.
Right. Yeah, let's hope that that's not what we find in the coming years. But I do think it brings up an important point, which is you've mentioned a few times that in some cases society or building management or facilities managers are maybe putting air quality on the back burner. Do you have a thought on, what is it that is preventing building managers, facilities managers, owners, those who are actually paying for the filtration that benefits occupants, from not adopting better technology or doing something to enhance or really put this at the forefront of their priorities for their buildings?
Well, I think we need to characterize the relationship between the facility managers and the equipment or the building itself. And the first question is
Right.
there a sense of ownership? Is there some sort of responsibility? During the past 26 years in my interaction with this field, I've met a lot of them. And there are some of them that maybe they belong to the owner of the building, whether it's a hospital, school, or a shopping mall, and they say, well, I have to justify the cost. And I said,
Right.
do you have an indoor air quality sensing system? He said, no. He said, you will never be able to realize what you're doing now, what you're inhaling now, and what you
Right.
will be inhaling if you improve it. So therefore, you need to have one step prior to filter acquisition. I think this is what's ailing the system. But let's take the second scenario where you hire a contractor to basically do the job for you, and you say, I'm going to pay you $1 million to maintain this for 3 years. The only priority he's going to say to himself is, I just want to save money. So I want to make sure that the filter will live forever. And I've heard this before in some of the countries. the age of the metallic washable filter is the same age of the air handling unit. And I said, how is
Wow.
that possible? You just wash it, you put it back, and then that's it. So this theology of washable filters and the addiction of shortcuts, it will never advance air quality. I mean, we're having two people speaking different languages, and they're not even on the same page. So let me put it in perspective. The notion that air filters are inside the air handling units and always in a way their acquisition has to something to do with air handling units. I think we need to address that. I proposed one way to do it earlier on, but it may not be the only one, the only way to do it. We can have another thing. Theology of washable filters, shortcuts. If your mindset is positioned for shortcuts, you're never going to progress not only air quality, you're never going to progress anything in that building in any under any circumstances. And then again, when you have a system like a fan coil unit allocating 10 mm and let's say 10 pascals to have some filtration, and then people will say, "Oh, I want to have a high efficiency filter." This system is positioned to have nothing, because if you don't consider it when you're designing the unit and you're selecting it, and again, I'm going to bring human occupancy here, and how is that HVAC system and filtration selection is fit for purpose for X number of people, and
Right.
with your proposed indoor air quality sensing system will tell you, here's a message, I'll send it to your smartphone. Carbon dioxide is high. You've exceeded the human occupancy. You have to do something. And here I'm addressing another fact, which is the adaptive HVAC system. That means the data I get should be fed to an adaptive HVAC system that's able to respond to the indoor air quality variation. Not just a system that is on or off or has 3 speeds or just changes to 1, 2, or 3 air changes per hour. I think these things need to be put in perspective, and we need maybe not to change it's not a face complexion, but we possibly need to turn the table on its head and design from scratch a system that will make our cities pandemic proof.
Really interesting perspective, Ayad, and maybe I would restate what I heard, at least part of that, as there's misaligned incentives between those who are financially connected to buildings and have to make decisions based on energy or cost, and those who are occupants of the buildings. And it sounds like one suggestion is the great equalizer of sensors and having data, understanding the actual environment to make decisions, which I think we all know, those of us in the industry have sort of been waiting, I think, for greater adoption of sensor technology, and it's definitely taking more time than might be hoped. But certainly there's technology out there to help to close this gap of misaligned incentives, and I think that's a great point. Because again, I think we could talk for probably 2 or 3 hours on all of this, Ayad. So I'm thinking about some of the questions that I wanted to ask, and I think some of the questions we've kind of hit on some of those points in previous questions. So I'd actually like to just kind of generally ask you, are there realignments or something that you think ultimately, besides sensor technology, that needs to transpire to raise the bar on indoor air quality, and how that's being approached? Is there, if you had one suggestion about what that would be helpful, besides sensors, what would that be?
Okay, let me just, before we jump into the answers, let me just mention a couple of points that I think, you inspired me to mention them now. Uh, you know, we look at the built environment. Let's say if you're in a hot climate, your immediate objective is thermal comfort. And every single one of us would complain if this objective, thermal comfort, is not achieved. But if your PM1 or formaldehyde is high, or H2S, NOx and SOx emission, ammonia is high, I mean, how would you then know? Would you wait until an asthma attack takes place and then you take your kid to the hospital to find out that there's something is wrong? Again, we did dwell on this, but we have to mention this.
Right.
I cannot be empathetic if facility managers, owners, or occupants don't know or don't care about air quality. To me, the game is the same. You would need to know what you're exposed to, and the government, the municipality, and everybody has to have a role. This is something that is now so affordable to have. We just need, and everybody's interested, by the way. When I speak to people in air handling units, air filtration, sensors, everybody is so excited to get it done. It's just a matter of getting everybody on the same, and this is the first realignment. All sit down from day one on the same design table and say, we want to make this a second to none built environment with a first class enclosure with air quality that everybody can inhale, and the health and safety regulations are met. Now, you've asked me about specifics. I think, as I said, we look at maybe new ways and innovative ways to separate the HVAC system possibly from the air handling units to make sure that we have more space allocated for filtration. Keep in mind, we're always neglecting that we have gaseous contaminants. If you go to a conventional HVAC system, it's all filters for particulates. And my question I pose to everyone listening, are you trying to tell me that it's not okay to inhale particulates, but it's okay to inhale gaseous contaminants? This has been neglected for years, and I think we need to look at it. Yeah. We need to overcome the challenges. If it's space, as I said, we can look at it. But that's a second realignment. I think the third realignment can go into filter media. We can entertain hydrophobic media. We can entertain media that is much stronger in terms of strength, so we don't have deformation during operation. We can have aerodynamic filter design so that we don't have to attain higher efficiency for a particle capture at a much higher pressure drop, and hence we go or fall into the trap of energy efficiency and energy usage and so on. But again, let me conclude this question by saying the following. We cannot enjoy or we cannot install ordinary air filters or filter technology and expect to obtain an extraordinary air quality. So we have to think out of the box, and that may not necessarily, the solution may not necessarily lie only in filtration. You may have to look at other aspects of the built environment, the way that your heat load is required. Maybe you can reduce it now. There are so many aspects you can improve to ensure that your system can be designed in a much better manner, so you don't have to require huge HVAC systems, and hence you have to filter a lot.
Yeah, fantastic information for our listeners, Ayad, and it's a good reminder as well, while we talk often about filtration and indoor air quality, that there are other elements to a healthy building which are so important, which is why you have certification bodies like the WELL Building Standard that actually looks at the total health of the environment for occupants. But I did want to kind of riff off of your comment about so-called NOx and SOx and VOCs and maybe even formaldehyde. I know that quite often particulates are what the focus is when filtration is thought about from an HVAC or air handler perspective. And as you mentioned or invited or questioned our listeners on, is it okay that you're stopping particulates but you're not paying attention to VOCs and other things happening in your indoor environment with the air? Do you have any suggestions or thoughts on how you can, beyond particulates, how you can actually help to create a safe environment around VOCs and some of these other dangerous contaminants that could be in the air?
Thanks, Bruce. I think there are two elements here. The first element is that we may have VOCs coming in from outdoors to indoors, but we also have to realize that there are many elements within the indoor space that can emit VOCs, and part of it is furniture, wood, some cleaning sprays. So again, when we address air quality, we have to realize that filtration is not the only problem, and hence it's not the only solution. And this is where you need to possibly recirculate, ventilate, and then look at the concentration. And I always say this: distinguish the issue. If the issue is a ventilation issue, leaning on filtration may be an expensive option and maybe also impractical. So you need to realize, how you tweak solutions to better serve the human occupants in one way, but also you need to look at it from a financial point of view, because we're all engineers, and engineers need to quantify the problem and also need to be to look at the economics of solving the issue. But we cannot really solve these issues without entertaining additional stages, which is still a challenge. You need to engineer it to understand what are the gaseous contaminants, and again, how many stages would you require to do it? What do you filter? Which pollutants or pollutant would you filter before the other? So there are a lot of moving targets when it comes to filtration, and it's not that simple. Therefore, you need basically to rely on scientists and certified filtration specialists to be able to understand your solution and give and tweak the filtration solution that you need to install. And eventually, filtration systems do not act alone. That's a fact.
Right.
You need to integrate them to an HVAC system. So let me run a couple of specifics. I think what we could do definitely is look at actions and policies, highlight the importance of clean air to the well-being. I think, as I said before, we need to get everybody to sit on the same table, speak the same language while being on the same page. Without this, everybody is designing in isolation, and we're going to end up having another pandemic where we all going to go back to our standards and ask two questions. Have we actually followed the standards that we've been suggesting in the past so many years? And if we have they been wrong? And now we've talked about, we have a new standard for so and so, and now, no, forget what I told you in the past 30 years. I have a new standard for you. I think we have to be honest with ourselves and look at what really matters. And to find what really matters, we need to measure it first. So that's my term for today. Measure what matters, characterize the outdoor air physically and chemically, so we know what we are up against.
Yeah, that's a very clear message, Ayad, and I think an important one for everyone listening, for all of us to remember. You need to diagnose your environment in order to understand how to treat any problems within it. So data is going to be a critical part of that. So those of you who are not currently looking at sensor data for indoor air quality, go out and get some sensor technology so that it's in your home, your building, your office. I do think that's a really important first step, and appreciate all your comments around that, Ayad. I have really one last question, and then I'll invite you to, give any other statements, information, share any thoughts that you have generally from your experience. But on the topic of the pandemic, since as we know, we've come through, and of course there's cases bubbling up where it's not that we've finished the pandemic, and there's certain to be another virus or offshoot of what we dealt with COVID that will come along. So based on the experience that humanity had globally coming through this huge traumatic event, do you think that we are prepared? Have we learned enough to be better prepared the next time that we face something like the COVID pandemic?
Look, Bruce, I think the story has been tremendous, but the lessons learned have not been embraced. I mean, one of the facts are we understand that our losses. I cannot think of anyone that I speak to having lost an uncle or a loved one. And I've lost people, friends, and relatives. They were not even sick, but they got, the virus, and we lost them. So let me say this: if we have what it takes, and we can position appropriately what we possess in terms of technology, and even if the energy is a little bit higher than usual, and this is again a separate conversation we can have, let's invest that energy usage, because it's worth it. If we save one life saved is worth all this energy saving and the energy efficiency song, which I like. Again, I'm not against it. I know some people think I am, but I'm not. But we have to also balance our priorities.
Right.
I'm not,
Of course.
look, it's very obvious. We failed miserably in the pandemic. And I defy to sit down and discuss with anyone if he or she think otherwise.
Right.
The reason why I'm saying this is, the globe went into curfews and shutdown. We ran away to our indoor spaces, which were still polluted and had the risk of a transmission. And we left schools, workspaces, because they were occupied by the virus. That's a drastic defeat, Bruce. And if we don't learn anything from it, I would take one thing away: because next pandemic is not allowed to come. My priority today should be, whether I'm a government industry leader or a private sector, I want to have a pandemic-proof city. I want my building envelope to be protected. I don't want to lose a son. I don't want to lose a parent, and I don't want to lose a loved one. That's my message today, Bruce. I think we are very tired, talking about the same things and dancing the change. What we need to do is, action, what we've been talking about. Air quality has been a pillar, but we ignored it. Now we know that without it, you would have to abandon your indoor space.
Right. Well, excellent points. Well said, and fully agree. Health and the ability to promote healthy living and save people's health, while you have to take energy and financials into account, of course, as a reality of modern society, is the objective is to keep everyone healthy in the built environment. And certainly sounds like we have the tools, the technology, for the most part, to improve upon that, and in many cases to make safe environments, but we need the societal will, and maybe a little bit more focus on data and understanding our environments to deploy the right technology. So there's a lot here we've discussed in the last 50 minutes or so, Ayad, that I think is quite powerful as topics, and hopefully it has helped our listeners think a bit, maybe formulate some additional questions to continue this important conversation. But before we sign off today, I did want to give you a chance to have one last statement, or if there's anything we didn't cover that you think our listeners would benefit from hearing about, learning about. I wanted to give you a chance to have a last comment.
Thank you, Bruce. I just want to conclude by saying that enhancing indoor air quality, or air quality in general, gained a broad appeal in the past 3 years or 4 years during the pandemic. However, we cannot rely on instantaneous and intermittent hikes in attention. We need to make sure we reinforce it in our economy, in our standards of living, because we cannot go back to lockdowns and curfews. This is a complete defeat, as I said earlier. The essence, in my judgment, of air quality inclusion lies in legislating policies, programs, and practices where professional maintenance are conducted. So eventually we can orchestrate this clean air delivery, not only to those that in a built environment, but if we reduce emissions in the outdoors, we can even have some mercy on those without a built environment. And again, failing to do so will turn our indoor spaces and outdoor spaces to polluted enclosures, and we're subjecting human occupants and human beings to unacceptable air quality, which in so many ways seem to have been an allowable sin. Ways to do it: innovate, allow air filtration and responsible fossil fuel combustion to be embraced. Get down to the maintenance programs, get technicians and engineers to be trained and retrained through programs that are certified to raise the bar of their understanding, and eventually equip this with a second-to-none incentive program where banks and governments and industry leaders can have incentives, possibly tax credits, rebates, so people who like to go and upgrade and retrofit can be rewarded, not punished. If you don't want to do it, you have two choices. You retrofit or retire, you retrain or retire. But what we want to do is we want to have a much cleaner environment than the one we've inherited from our parents. We've taken so much from our resources and supply chains. We borrowed a lot from our children and grandchildren, and it's time to pay them back.
Well, that's quite a final statement, Dr. Al-Attar. I really appreciate everything you've shared with us today, your passion for this space. Thank you for being such a great ambassador and spokesperson for the importance of indoor air quality and public health in the built environment, amongst other things. And thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. This was a great conversation, and as always, I really enjoyed speaking with you. So thank you for making time to be here with us.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed today's episode as well. If you found it interesting or educational, please do share it with those that you think would also find it interesting. And until next time, I am your host, Bruce Larange. Appreciate your joining in and listening to our podcast, The Air Exchange. And we'll look forward to hopefully catching you on our next episode. Until then, wishing you healthy and happy breathing. Thank you.